This podcast is supported by VPLA, Victorian Planning Environmental Law Association. Welcome to the Planning Exchange, where we interview built environment professionals who are doing interesting work beyond the ordinary. I'm Jess Noonan, and I'm joined by my colleague, Peter Jewell. We're obsessed with living longer, but what if the real question is how do we live better for longer? Across the world, there are places where people routinely live into their 90s and their 100s. This is not because of biohacking, expensive supplements, or cutting-edge medicine, but as a result of how their communities are designed, how they move through their day, and how they relate to one another. These places are known as blue zones. From Sardinia and Okinawa to Ikaria, Nicoya, and Loma Linda in California. These are places where longevity is the norm, not the exception. And the most fascinating part? The individuals didn't optimize their lives, their environment did it for them. Today we're digging into what blue zones really are, how they're identified, and why they matter, especially for cities, planners, and policymakers shaping the places we live in right now. We're speaking today with one of the strongest voices on wellbeing, purpose, and what it really means to live a good life. That is, of course, Marcus Pearce. This isn't about chasing 100 years. It's about designing places where the healthy choice is the easy choice, where connection, movement, and meaning are built into everyday life. So if you're curious about what blue zones can teach our cities and why longevity might start at the street level, this conversation is for you. Welcome to the show, Marcus. This is a really niche area. How did you become involved in blue zones? And would you call yourself a blue zone expert?
I'm not sure, but first of all, Jess and Peter, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be with you both. Look, I thought I would be in sports media my whole entire life. I grew up wanting to be the next Bruce McAvaney or Eddie Maguire. I worked at the Footy Show and SEN, a sports radio network, and then I fell in love with my now wife, Sarah. I was a workaholic, binge drinking, cigarette smoking, Red Bull guzzling sports journo who met a health professional who's never done anything bad in her whole life. And long story short, I got bitten by the health bug to the point where I gave up smoking. I went vegetarian, then vegan. Sam Newman, my old Footy Show colleague, gave me a new nickname. It went from MP or Piercy to Mungbean. But I was obsessed with health and wellness to the point where I left the media. Sarah and I moved overseas, and I decided at the height of our veganism to start shaving with avocado. I thought that was the secret. If you were vegan, I read a book saying avocados are good to eat. You may as well shave with them. I was like, we also gave up alcohol. So I went from a workaholic, binge drinking, cigarette smoking journalist to a raging vegan teetotaler, shaving with avocado. And I thought that I'd found the fountain of youth until I read a book called Healthy at 100. If anyone here has had a Baskin Robbins ice cream, John Robbins was the heir to the throne of the billion-dollar company. He wrote a book called Healthy at 100. He was the #1 vegan author. And I thought this book will tell me how good I am being vegan. I'd been vegan for about 5 or 6 years. And in the opening of the book, the second page of the introduction, it referenced a study done by the Yale School of Public Health. And this study, Jess and Peter, asked 600 people over the course of 20 years, as you age, you become less useful. Agree or disagree? As you age, you realize your best years are behind you. Agree or disagree? As you age, you realize it's all downhill from here. Agree or disagree? Now, what this study found after the 20-year course was that the people that had the belief that it was all downhill from here and their best years were behind them, those people died 7.5 years earlier than people that had an empowered view of getting older. And not only that, those people that looked forward to getting older had a better day today because their future was more compelling because they were actually okay with getting older. And this, for me, was the biggest aha moment probably I've ever had in my life because I had given up smoking, given up alcohol, given up meat, given up lots of things in order to pursue the fountain of youth and aging well. And I realized after being a teetotaling, raging vegan for 6 or 7 years, how wrong I was and how much I'd been barking up the wrong tree. And so not overnight, but like the Pantene ad, it did happen. I brought back meat and dairy. I now love a red wine. I don't smoke anymore, which I think is a good thing. But I naturally just brought myself somewhere back into the middle. And ever since that day, I've been interviewing centenarians and graceful ages on a podcast called 100 Not Out, which is not a cricket podcast. It's a longevity podcast. And that was 13 odd years ago. And so that's the long answer as to how I got into this space.
Two things. I think in the first 10 seconds of talking to you, I figured that you must have been involved in radio of some description, because you've definitely got the voice for radio.
You're very kind. Thank you.
And second point, the other observation I made was, geez, very sharp shave.
How good.
That must
How
be
nice.
Marcus, moving on from your shaving, Jess's distraction there. What's with these blue zones? And as you said before, off air, that you're not an expert on blue zones. You talk about many other things, and you have a tour to Greece each year, I think. Can you tell us what sort of things you want to show people there, which helps better aging?
Yeah, great question. And I'm glad you've brought this up, Peter, because I'm not affiliated with the Blue Zones in any way. It just so happened that 10 years ago, I think Liz Hayes went there for 60 minutes. And one of my wife's patients at the time said, remember when you used to text people saying, turn on Channel 9 or turn on the ABC? She actually sent me a text saying, turn on Channel 9, Liz Hayes is in Ikaria, this little Greek island. I watched it and I thought it'd be great to take some listeners of our podcast there. So for the last 10 years, we've been going to this little Greek island, Ikaria, and also to Sardinia, the Italian Blue Zone. But to your point, it's not a tour, it's an experience, because people are there to experience for themselves what it is for their life. And I think for a lot of people, and again, we were having a little bit of argy-bargy before we hit record here, a lot of people recognise that social connection is something that's missing in their life, and it's been socially acceptable, particularly in whether you call it developed nations or Western culture or individualist societies, where we're too busy to socialise. We've lost contact with our school friends. We're working so hard we can't catch up for anything. We find it difficult to play midweek tennis or soccer with the local club, or catch up, whether it's for mahjong or a glass of wine or whatever it is. People have found it so difficult to maintain connection, community, whatever you want to call it. You go over to, again, I've been to Ikaria and Sardinia, going to Okinawa this year, but you go to these communities and it's the number one part of their life is connection to people. And we've had people say that it's been confronting how emotionally safe people have felt over there, but also because of how emotionally open people are in these communities. And again, it's easy to talk about, but it's probably harder to imagine, because we're in this, not grind, but we live at a different pace and we live in a different way. And so my favourite part of visiting those places is that life is just so different over there, and it does challenge us on many levels, whether it's the built environment or our life and lifestyle design as to how we're doing it. It's challenging on many levels for sure.
Pete, have you been to the Japanese Blue Zone?
No, I haven't. I've been to Kyushu, where there's a very long, one of the longest health studies in the world. It's at Hisayama, and they've had health studies since 1961, very thorough. So they can measure people over a long period. And when people get ill, they look back at their past records to work out what were the markers. But Marcus, why did you mentioned I play midweek tennis? I played twice, two nights in tennis, and it is a marvellous thing, and I'm always raving about it to everyone to get involved in sport, or just whatever you like, get involved in it. But before Jess asks the next question, why do you think in contemporary society people have disengaged? Because we used to have so many organisations, so many religious, sporting, cultural, self-improvement, gardening. It's a tough question, not a scientific answer, but why do you think people sort of despair and disengage?
It is a fabulous question, Pete, and it is a great dinner party conversation, because I think I think of my upbringing, and then I think of, okay, all you could do when you got home was maybe watch the TV, but then you are just catching up with neighbours. You'd be in the garden, you might be reading a book. In other words, I think distraction and technology has been one major factor in our disengagement. You even look at, when you're in airports, on trams, trains, and so on, we could be socially engaging with people, but technology has put somewhat of a barrier up there to engagement. A stranger used to be a friend you haven't met yet, and now it's stranger danger. And again, as a journo by original training, I often think that if we didn't know so much, if we weren't so informed these days, would that be better for us? And I think a whimsical romantic nature or answer is maybe we would be kinder to others and we would prioritise social engagement more. The other part of it is no doubt is the very fact of living in a developed nation that has incredible levels of wealth. Is that if you think of, and again, I'm not trying to show my age here because it happened just before I was born, I think, but you used to have those families where it was one parent, often the dad, working, and then it became a double income family, and real estate prices grew, and in order for the mortgage to be paid, both parents were working, and often the female, and not meaning to sound sexist, but often the wife or the female partner was organising the social calendar. But now that wife or female partner is now working, and then all of the demands of that has made it so much harder for social engagement and community to occur. That's just my instantaneous thoughts on your question, but I absolutely love the question, and I'm going to consider the answer to it a lot more down the track. I love that, Pete.
We thank Victorian Planning Reports, our very first supporter. If you want the A to Z of planning decisions in Victoria and excellent editorials, please get yourself a subscription to the VPRs. Details on our website.
We would like to thank Alderson Properties, a terrific sponsor of the podcast. Great people, great properties. Details on our website.
Marcus, just to set the scene, I mentioned the 5 designated blue zones around the world currently. Obviously, you've been to a couple of them, not all of them. The ones that you have been to, can you just describe for any listeners that don't know those blue zones, but describe the scale of the places? Are they towns? Are they cities, neighbourhoods? Are they regions?
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece. And before the fact checkers get their knickers in a knot, there is an official 6th blue zone, and it is Singapore. And we can talk about that because from an urban planning perspective, it's got a lot of people excited. But I also think we have to maintain a memory that village life is really the foundation of what has brought the blue zones into existence. And again, for those people that love their planning, I want you to think about this. The Greek island of Ikaria, it's an island of 244 square kilometres. It's got a population of 8,000 people. It's 200 villages. So do your maths. Is that 40 people per village? Where we stay in a little village called Nath, it's about 70 people. In other bigger villages, it might be 100, 150. But that means in some villages, it's literally 10 or 20. And I've walked past those villages. It's like 2 or 3 homes. But we've got to be mindful that same with Sardinia, which is 100 times bigger in landmass. It's 25,000 square kilometres. It's 1.6 million people, which I think is 200 times more than Ikaria. But the whole island is not a blue zone in Sardinia. In Ikaria, the lifestyle and the people and the way of life, it's the same wherever you go. But if you land in Cagliari in Sardinia, it's just another big airport in another big city, and it's not like a blue zone at all. When I arrive into Cagliari, no disrespect to Cagliari, but I'm like, get me out of here and get me to the countryside, because the Sardinian blue zone is not what you on Instagram. It's not the super yachts up in the northeast. It's what I call the needle in a haystack blue zone. It's in the middle of nowhere where no tourist is going to go. It's in the southwest, and it's like going back in time. The built environment is different. The people are different. The way of life is different. It's slower. In Okinawa, which we're going to in October this year, again, there's a culture in Okinawa that the centenarians or the graceful ages have, but they have gone from the healthiest prefecture of Japan to the unhealthiest in the space of one generation. The centenarians are burying their children and their grandchildren, and I'm not being salacious here, because of the US military base, which then brings in the McDonald's and the KFC and the Pizza Hut and so on, not to mention that Western lifestyle of work and corporate culture and so on. And so now they're too busy to see their family, and they're too busy to socialize, and they're too busy to exercise, but of course they're eating poorly and so on. So village life has been the foundation of the blue zones. Those 3 that I've just mentioned are all islands: Ikaria, Sardinia, Okinawa. Nicoya, Costa Rica is a peninsula. Loma Linda, California. Oh, look, I kind of feel like that was bought or financed. I don't want to sound too... I haven't been there, so it's hard for me to say that with a great level of fact, but it doesn't quite add up for me. And then Singapore, which is kind of called the Blue Zone 2.0, is a really interesting case study, because they've, in a way, brought a lot of this wisdom from village life into Singaporean life. But a lot of that, Australians and many Western cultures would reject instantaneously, and we wouldn't allow it. And if I can just give you one example, in Sardinia, in Singapore, 80 to 90% of people do not have a car because the government makes it prohibitively expensive to have a car. Obviously, from a design perspective, they've nudged you into walking, which is awesome, and getting public transport. But if we did that in Australia and we made cars exorbitantly expensive, and you can imagine trying to do that on scale given the size of Australia, I'm talking about land mass and how spread out we are, I think there'd be a riot if we introduced some of the policies in that way. So not to say it can't be done, but what makes Singapore special doesn't mean that you can instantly translate it to other cities and urban environments.
And Mark, within each of these blue zones, is there a percentage of the population that are over at 100? What is there a percentage to get the?
So this is, again, I don't mean to laugh, but it changes, right? Because old people die. So villages, there's a village in Sardinia called Aroli, which is not a official blue zone village, but we go there. There's a restored Sardinian shepherd's huts, which we stay at, and we spend time with the locals of Aroli. But it was, at a time, the highest per capita centenarian village in Sardinia. But then, of course, these are little villages with small populations. So then people die, and then it's, so does that mean it's no longer a blue zone village? And then there's a village called the Centenarians Village, which is Saiulo in Sardinia, and it is population 100, and I get the numbers wrong. It's either 14 or 22 centenarians in the village. But again, maybe one year I went there and it was 14, and maybe the next year it was 22, or vice versa. But the thing about longevity is, in these small villages, not New York City, but like a village of 800 people or a village of 200 people, it's like a volatile penny stock, if that makes sense. So we've got to be mindful that
statistically
it can be slow moving, in that you can't speed up the days, you can't get older quickly. And if you have 22 centenarians and then you have 14, does that mean you've lost the art of aging well? I think not. I think, one, we might become a bit fixed on that number 100, but two, I think it's just a matter of time for all of us until we fall off the perch. It's just the way in which that happens is what makes these places interesting. They have their quality of life in their quantity of life, which developed nations do not have. And that might be a conversation for another day, but that is the great unspoken in longevity and maybe even urban planning is it's not just quantity, it's quality in that quantity. Pete?
Marcus, you mentioned Okinawa and you blamed the Americans for the drop-off. And, look, I'm just going to stand up. The Americans have been in Okinawa since 1945. So it's not, and you refer to very old people burying their sons or their grandchildren. That might relate to the cultural values of that very old generation and the lifestyle. I don't think you can blame the American base.
I'm not blaming the base. I'm blaming the fact that, to your cultural values, if the centenarians of today were born in 1926 and for 19 years they had their cultural values, it's been easy for them to hold on to those cultural values for their life. Whereas someone born in 1950 has grown up in a different culture, which happens, we would understand that from us, like our parents couldn't get any more than fish and chips or Chinese. Now we can get all kinds of meals if we want to get takeaway. But for the centenarians of Okinawa, they've held on to their lifestyle. Just like you look at Ikaria and Sardinia. In Ikaria, there's no fast food restaurants. Like, again, small island, there's no McDonald's on Ikaria. There's no KFC. There's no supermarkets. So we've just got to be mindful, not a blame game, it's just an observation game of why is it that because that's the only blue zone that has had that cultural influx of another culture, whereas you won't see Americanism, for want of a better term, in Ikaria or Sardinia like you would in Okinawa. That's all that is. It's definitely no blame.
But again, I guess based on what we were talking about before, it's not just one element either. It's the contribution of all these different components that go into being a blue zone. And like one of the other things that I know you talk a lot about is purpose and connections. How closely do you see those ideas aligning in blue zones?
This is something that I did a talk for Deloitte Canada last year all about purpose, and that's 1,200 people in a very big country, which a lot of Australians could attribute to. And then you can talk with 6 people in Sardinia or Okinawa, and it's the exact same conversation. This is the thing, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, working your big corporate role, or whether you're on a tiny island that's somewhat isolated from the world, purpose for every single one of us is to help people. Peter's purpose, Jess's purpose, my purpose is to help people. But how we do it is what makes us different. But the very fact that our purpose is to help people means that we are going to engage with people. And this is what is baked into these blue zone cultures more, naturally, dare I say it, than it is in, say, more developed nations or little younger countries like Australia. So you go to Ikaria or you go to Sardinia, they have a lot more relationships are very important to them. Now, we talk about this in business, but we also have quite a big focus on transaction and value and so on. And so when you look at this play out, and anyone here that's traveled to Europe or Asia will know that sometimes you have very generous experiences with small family-owned businesses that are just so grateful for your business, and it means so much to them that you would spend money in their little restaurant or their little pensione or their Airbnb, and we think that's just for them in the way that they live. But my interpretation or my perspective on it is that the way that they do purpose, like that gratitude for work, so many people, you think about dissatisfaction in the workplace, which is all purpose, and I'm not saying that we're not grateful for our jobs, like I think many of us are, but we also have a pretty good whinge factor when it comes to our work. Sadly, a lot of people don't feel appreciated. They want to work, but they don't feel appreciated in their workplace. But you go to other countries and you see how much they're battling to earn $1. And then it's, oh my gosh, I think I'm really grateful to have a mortgage. And I think I'm really grateful to have a salary, because a lot of these cultures, they can't have a salary. They rely on very seasonal factors, whether they're farmers or whether they run restaurants or whether they run car hire companies or whatever it is. And so their purpose is so baked into helping people. But the other element around it is that their community, and again, you've all had this as tourists, their community is all baked into helping each other. Now, it's hard, and I have so many conversations around people. I live in northern New South Wales, a little town called Mullumbimby. I love that I can go and knock on a neighbour's door, and I know every neighbour around here by name, and I can say, I've run out of sugar, I've run out of milk, can you help? Now, it is so basic, but do you know how many people do not feel safe doing that in modern Australia or whatever country you are, listeners?
Well, Marcus, what you're talking is a common factor about scale. So that, small places, I live in a relatively small place, and it's a high trust society because there is all those connections. Whereas the bigger the urban place, and presumably a lot of the blue zone locations you're referring to are traditional, high trust, high dependency environments. And the bigger you get, it's inevitable that's going to fail. Yeah.
Absolutely. But then there's a friend of mine who some of you might know, Tim Forrester, who's got Aria up in Brisbane, and he will actually put on the top of their apartment buildings, he will put community spaces, green spaces, people to come together, whether it's swimming pools. He will make it easy for people to connect, because whether you want to call it wellness real estate or whatever the term might be these days, but the very fact that you're pointing on, Pete, is if you don't create, you can be in the middle of Brisbane, middle of Melbourne, middle of Sydney, if you don't create high trust environments in whatever your development is, I don't care whether it's a workplace, an apartment building, a street. To your point, Pete, it is one of the most high value stakes, and I'm too much of a romantic to think that we can let go of that. If we don't have a plan to create high trust environments, I love it when I talk to developers that this is baked into. If we don't have a plan to make it a high trust environment, and whether we want to talk about it with the way we put nudges here and pads there and green space there and that, what I find really interesting is how many, not just retirement villages, because I do a lot of in that space, but just apartment buildings, whatever, they don't have enough communal spaces where you can bump into someone and sit down and have a coffee or a glass of wine. There might be one space here or one space there, but it is not an all the time place, where if you go into a lot of these villages, there are so many places where you can just sit and relax. And we don't have that anywhere near as much in the urban world. And I think it's something that would be great if, like you said, philosophically, it became more baked in.
I think we've gone full circle as well in that probably in the last 10 years in particular in urban planning, there has been more of a focus on social isolation and the need for connection being more embedded in the work that we do and the design of cities and towns and the like. But I think for a really long time, there was a real absence of that. And so I think we've got a situation where there's a lot of people that are really uncomfortable with connection.
Correct.
They find it awkward. They don't want to run into people. They just want to...
No matter how good the amenity, if you can't bring people there, it's just a sitting duck.
And, I've observed this recently. It's a very obvious point, but just even walking through my own local park and everyone is just device right in front of their face, walking along, big headphones on, don't even make eye contact anymore. I think that it plays a really big role, I think, in that removal of the bump in kind of culture, the bump into each other.
Well, I think
someone's door,
the COVID lockdowns did not help all of this. That isolation. So how can we make our places great again, Marcus? So what can we borrow from these? It's hard to scale up these things, but your observations on what do you tell people?
Again, to your point earlier around design, you can have the greatest design, but if you don't have the inclination, if you've got, like you said, Jess, if you've got that phone in front of you, but you're in a beautiful green space with historic trees and flowers, it's just gorgeous, but it's there. I don't know, Pete, that I have the answer because I love people. But to your point, COVID made a lot of people lose trust in people. And so what I notice in Icaria, and it is very confronting, and I see it in Sardinia. I'm trying to answer your question, Pete, but you'll answer it for me. In Icaria, you build a small home on a big piece of land because survival, like the garden, the goats, they're going to keep us alive. The shelter's there, but there's no extra space. In Australia, we fill everything we can with bricks and mortar. And if we have just a pot plant, then that's our green space, right? In Sardinia, they often build on 3 levels, which if I'm consulting to retirement living, they're never going to do it, right? Who's going to buy 3-story apartments when we've been indoctrinated to not do stairs? But they have it so that they can socialize. They've got living and dining. They've often got the basement, which is one where they can hang up their prosciutto, and they've got their vats of wine. And then the 3rd level is the garden. But they've baked in their social life into their design. In Icaria, they might have the smallest house, but you're on the patio, you're on the couch, you're around the dining table. We might have those designs, but we don't let people in. So I don't think it's about design. I don't think we can nudge with design the inclination to socialize. I think we can make it easier to make it sustainable. But
it's a very big topic and has been for a very long time, Marcus, in planning and architecture, whether you can create spaces which will improve life. And now it's automatic, yes, better designed places will improve life, but it can only do so much. And I think we're in agreement there. What do you think, Jess, on that?
I think it really depends on the stage of life that you're in. I'm a big believer that stages of life dictate your comfort level in going outside of the boundaries. Like I've found having kids over the last couple of years to be a period of what you would think would be isolation, but if anything, it's been the complete opposite because you've got this common scenario when you go to a park, particularly where I live. There's a lot of other young families around, and the fact that I can go to the park and it's guaranteed that I know that I'll run into someone either that I know or that I'm going to make a connection with. Whether that's come out of boredom through being on extended periods of mat leave through COVID and the like, I'm not sure. But yeah, I really think it depends on your stage of life, because I also think on the back end of that, when you get to in your 70s, 80s, 90s, or whatever it might be in that later stage, you're also probably more open to making those connections. I see a lot of older people sitting in my local parks just on the park bench, and they're very open to talking to people as they walk past. They're the ones that do say hello, good morning, good afternoon, whatever. So, yeah, I do think it has a lot to do with it.
Just on that, so one of your recent guests, a good friend of mine, Daniel Gannon from the Retirement Living Council, we both recently went go-karting with 20 residents from Aveo's Bayview Gardens in Sydney. And I didn't realise that there's about, I think there might be 300 residents or somewhere between 200 and 300 residents. And I was speaking to one of the residents and I was saying, how many of the residents do you really know or see? And they said, look, maybe somewhere between 60 and 100. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Because there's going to be, let's just say there's 100, let's say there's 100 or 150 introverts, just make it 50% of society, right? Extro and intro. You can't, no matter how good, again, your amenity or any type of services that you offer to help people get out there, people do it differently and in their own way. And to your point, Jess, different stages of life, yes, but changing people's nature, that's the thing that I think, how do we make it safer for introverts who love one-on-one or small group environments? So classes, small group classes are really good for introverts. Big festivals and so on, extroverts are going to love and the rest. But I feel like the design factor is so important, but it's a hollow victory if all you've got is this beautiful complex, but there's no buzz. There's no buzz. There's nothing happening. And I think that's probably the piece that, that's the piece that a lot of, I don't know, there's not one straight answer, but that's the piece that I think is missing in society is how do we re-engage society? Because we live in such a beautiful country. How do we re-engage? And I look at all these beautiful buildings and so on. How do we re-engage people to make the most of the beautiful design that we have in our country?
Marcus, apart from taking groups to Greece and other places, what other parts of your consultancy do you do that's involved in, general terms, better living? Is that, can I call it that?
Absolutely. Yes. Most of my work, if I'm not traveling for the Blue Zones experience is, speaking to corporates around. Now, it might be use retirement living as an example. Sometimes it's doing talks to current residents and wanting to, Jess brought this up earlier, stoke the fire in that 70 or 80-year-old that may have bought into the belief that it's all downhill from here and I'm just going to slow down as I get older. I've been listening to Dick Van Dyke, his latest book, 100 Secrets to Living to 100. And he said that he almost at 85 just decided to retire into the hills and slowly fritter away. And then he just realized that he didn't want to slowly decline. And it makes me think that I don't think anyone actually wants to just slowly shrivel up and die. I don't know, Pete, if you see this off air or on air, but who wants to die in a nursing home? My beautiful dad is 8 years here. His wife, she's away at the moment and he's in respite. And I don't want that to be the way that I go or others go. It's not the way that any of us would choose to go. So a lot of my messaging to corporate or to residents of retirement or to real estate is how do you actually wake up in the morning, fill your own bucket, like live your best life so that you can be the best of yourself, others. And that many people have ever answered before. This whole piece of getting older, like you said in the intro, Jess, it's not about ice baths and meditation and going vegan and cutting out alcohol. It's enjoying your chocolate cake and having your glass of wine and doing it with people. And I don't know anyone in Ikaria that drinks alone. I've got a 94-year-old friend called Vaso in Prospera, a little village. And she's like, Marcus, I live alone, but I am not lonely. Because if she wants a wine, she will pick up the carafe, knock on the next door neighbour's house and say, let's have a drink. And that is not something that we've really mastered the art of too well in our more developed nations. We just stop at the bottle-o and polish off a bottle of wine by ourselves whilst watching TV. And I don't think that's really the art of doing longevity well.
Yeah. Well, Marcus, what is the spark? I mean, how do you get sort of a sedentary or someone who is just gliding down? What sort of, I mean, it's one thing to say, pick your game up or, I used to always say to Jess, we used to say this a long time ago in interviews, I used to say, if we knew what day we died, we didn't know which year, that would change your whole outlook on everything. If you knew you were going to die, on the 7th of May, but you know what year, you imagine how that would change people's lives.
Wow. That is an interesting thought experiment, isn't it?
It is. So you can attribute that to Jess and I, but how do you get people to go? Because it's hard. People don't just say, "Oh, I need someone to tell me that," to re-spark it. How? Tell me more about that.
Well,
Tell our
for
listeners
the
more
older,
about that.
yeah. Well, I think I say for the older generation, but really, it's for a lot of us. You go back to the time when you had a real level of belief that you either loved something, or that you were good at something. It's remarkable to me how many people. So, Jess, you've got 2 young children by the sounds of things. It's remarkable to me how many people like Jess, and if it's not a mother, let's call it a dad that bought a business in his 20s or 30s, and they give up something because they've now had children or they've gone into business and they don't have time to play midweek tennis anymore. And they then get to 60 or 70 and they're bored out of their brains, but they actually have a lowered belief system in aging gracefully. They think it's all downhill from here. I'm just going to wither on the vine. And then you go back to a time when you really loved something. And often it's going back to early adulthood or childhood. And so it could be, because I use the example often, a lady called Patty Jones who retired from England to Spain. Her husband dies after 18 months of living on a Spanish island. She doesn't know what to do. She then goes, I used to love dancing, but I gave it up when I had kids. Goes down to the local dance studio and 2 years later wins Britain's Got Talent, age 80, doing the salsa acrobatica, and becomes famous all around the world. And it's because she went back to her childhood, early adulthood to find something that she loved. I love AFL football, so take me to the MCG any day of the week and I'm just like that little kid again. For a lot of people, it's going back in time to what fired you up and what you loved. And for a lot of men, it's something physical, whether it's golf or tennis or soccer or rugby or whatever it is. It could be gardening. It could be often for women. There's a client I have that loves to stitch and bitch on a Wednesdays. They get knitting and they just talk and talk. For others, it's as simple as just catching up for a wine or a coffee, but it's often going back to that time of remembering when you loved to do something and then bringing a piece of that, even if it's an hour a week, into your life. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's generally where it begins from for a lot of people.
And I think it's the thing of small steps, right? Like you say, an hour a week, but once you get back into something like that, you're more likely to do more of it, and you're more likely to probably reach out and do other activities that once brought you joy.
Yeah, and I know this isn't a personal growth podcast, but may I just say, for some people, that is actually romance. And this is just, again, particularly as people get older, if they've lost spouses, the permission factor for other people, for those people to then go and fall in love again. When we go to Icaria in Sardinia, the amount of men that say, what do you love and think about all day? And they go, women. I'm like, whoa, you can't say that in your 30s or 40s or 50s. But then when you're in your 80s or 90s and they have got all the spark in the world and you're like, wow, you can actually see, again, use Dick Van Dyke as an example. You go, what's your secret, Dick? And you're like, it's my wife. So for some people, it's romance. For other people, it's hobbies or sport. For others, it's still building things or being handy. It's different for everyone, but nothing's off the table. That's the whole point. We can't restrict ourselves to one answer.
Well, Pete, I would say that you have more extracurricular activities than anyone I know.
Well, there's so many enjoyable things, Jess. I'm just fascinated, Marcus. I mean, like I've got bees, I play tennis, I do,
No, he literally
things.
does everything. He puts me to shame, Marcus.
But
Anyway, different phase of life. Jess, you're still
yeah.
raising little kids.
That's true, but I mean, I'm fortunate. I've got good groups around me. I've got lots of things around me, but a lot of people live by themselves, are lonely. I mean, we've got this loneliness epidemic, and I don't think it's exaggerated. You would know of this, Marcus. Anyway, I mean, it's not so much policymakers, but as a society, how we can tackle that. And I go back to a lot of the threads that society used to have. A lot of the networks have disappeared or shrunk. But over to you.
Yeah, well, so it depends on the sector and the phase of life, right? Because corporate, if you go to the blue zones, their siesta is one of their biggest pieces of their life. I remember Ilya, the great farmer, coming back on his motorbike from his farm. It's 2:00, and I'm like, Ilya, why are you always back here at 2:00? And he's like, Marcus, don't you know? Siesta, do you know what it actually means? And I'm like, no. And he's like, after 6 hours of work, you rest. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he's like, so I come home, I have my lunch, I have a rest, I'll chill out with my mates, and then I'll go back to work. And by then, the sun's going down. Now, can you imagine having a 90-minute siesta at 2:00 in the middle of your corporate working day? Like, we'd never allow it. We just wouldn't allow it. So you talk about how do we actually bring this back? We've got to be mindful of the society that we live in. If I'm talking to an older group that's no longer in the corporate group, then I'm going, okay, let's all acknowledge that some of us are extroverted and some of us are introverts. Don't put the introverts in the extroverted box, and don't make the extroverts, only hang around with one person when they want to be in a group. Pete, would you say you're an introvert or an extrovert?
It depends.
Of course, yeah. So then
sometimes
you get your energy from people?
Yeah, I am, definitely.
Okay, so let's say that we all have so we all have both sides, but let's just say you're extroverted for the sake of the exercise. So you get energy from people. When you're not with people, you might get a bit antsy or you might get a bit flat or so on. Whereas the introvert often wakes up with a full battery, and their human engagements get them to battery life nearer to zero. And when they come home from work, they can't talk because they've been an introvert living in an extroverted world, and they just need silence. And that's totally okay. Not silence, but they need quiet. An extrovert, they can go out at 9:00 at night, maybe later, 6:00 in the morning, because they are like a wind turbine. They get their energy off people. From a policy perspective, we cannot make people who they are not. So depending on whether we're talking a corporate, whether we're talking a retirement living, whether we're talking to vertical communities and its developments, and it's like, how do we engage? We have to engage both, because the introverts will love the safety features of the built environment, but they won't necessarily love the activities if we don't align them with an introverted personality. They will just love the electric, the gated community and how secure they are. But the extrovert wants more than that. So I think we've got to be more nuanced, dare I say it, more mature as to how we approach the human being, because amenity's not enough. Like, it's just not enough. It's great to attract sales and attract people, but you can be so lonely living in the best piece of real estate, and that is a hollow victory that too many people experience.
Yeah, agree. Marcus, one other question which we probably haven't touched on yet is about the impact of, I guess, the blue zone label on economies. Does being designated a blue zone generally generate significant tourism, therefore helping that local economy?
I often wonder this, because I often tell people when they come with us that hopefully they don't feel like tourists. They feel like locals, because we've got, what I call them our Icarian family or Sardinian family. But there's no doubt that tourism is important, but these places are small. So I don't think they contribute a lot to their own national economy, not in the way that we would if we were talking about like a Singapore, right? But if you consider that Icaria actually was independent of Greece for, was it a year or 2 years? They attempted to not live off the government, and they realized that wasn't financially sustainable for them. But they would say they're Icarian first and Greek second. Sardinians would probably say the same thing. They're Sardinian first, Italian second. So from an economic perspective, many of them would prefer to almost not be connected, but they kind of need to be. And then from a what we might call revenue perspective, they, like a lot of smaller environments, they probably love our tourism, but they really love their own local rituals. I often wonder, when the European summer is over, do the locals go, all the outsiders have gone and now we can just have our little towns back? And again, living just out of Byron Bay, I can get that sense in February when all the tourists have gone. It's like, February's just a great month because you can get into town easily and so on and so forth. So I get that, but economically speaking, the locals of Ikaria would say they are like the third world country of the Greek islands, or the third world island, because they're not flashy. It doesn't look like a Greek island. But what I also find really interesting is that I think a lot of people don't go to Ikaria because they can't be bothered. They get lured into Mykonos or Santorini.
Yeah.
And so in a way that helps these blue zone villages sustain themselves more and not lose their soul, because they do have less traffic, less foot traffic, less people, so to speak, than those more popular destinations.
Interesting.
Well, Marcus, it's been a high voltage interview and enjoyable. Now we're on to Podcast Extra. Unless you want to ask anything else, Jess?
No, I think that's everything.
So, well, I'm sure we could talk for another 3 hours.
We
Marcus, you've
absolutely
been a
could.
great guest. But we're at Podcast Extra Culture Corner. Something you've read, seen, watched, or listened to, or experienced even that might be of interest to our listeners, and it doesn't have to be on topic.
No, well, I'm an avid reader. I probably like to read about 50 books a year, but the one that I came across the other day, I've read his most recent book, but David Attenborough turns 100 as we record this. He turns 100 tomorrow. And it reminds me of, I just recorded an episode on this called, Celebrity Centenarians. But more to the point, Dick Van Dyke last year, David Attenborough this year, more to the point is it creates a lot of great news in a bad news environment, and it gets people thinking on aging well, but it helps me to ask myself and others, who is your aging mentor? Because David Attenborough has been working in, one industry for 60 years. He's the only person to win an award in from black and white all the way through to 4K. He's won a BAFTA black and white through to 4K. So it's like, okay, who is your aging mentor? Who do you want to age like? Who do you go, when I'm 90 or when I'm 100, I want to be like him or her? And then the question is, am I not just doing the things, but being the person? Because a lot of people forget that your human beingness is a superfood to your longevity as much as what you do. That am I being the person and behaving in a way that's going to allow me to age gracefully? And I think that's just something that significant birthdays help us to think about. And I think, again, Attenborough turning 100 is helping me to think about, am I doing the right things and am I being the right person in order to age well into the future?
Wow, that's a big one. Jess, something you've done, something a Podcast Extra from you.
I've got another book. I like my true crime, Pete. So I've been reading the Mushroom Tapes, which is it's a collection of notes and observations, I guess, from 3 true crime writers. So it's Helen Garner, Sarah Krasnerstein, and Claire Hooper. I think I'm on to my 3rd week of my 1 week only library loan. I have actually borrowed it 3 times, but I'm not overdue this time, which is you'll be glad to know, Pete. But that's been a really, really interesting book as someone that followed that trial pretty closely. What about you?
Well, you're referring to the Beef Wellington murder.
Yes.
So
Sorry,
for people who don't know this story, there was a woman who invited her ex-husband and former in-laws for lunch and then cooked them beef Wellington, which is one of my favourite meals. But she used poison mushrooms and killed, I think, 3 people and very severely poisoned someone else. So she murdered a number of people. So that's the background there, Jess. Well, that's not very cheery, Jess. I don't like prawn. But I've been to Japan recently, and one of the things I bought over there were a couple of fountain pens, Marcus. When I started school way back in the day, we actually learnt on using ink and fountain pens.
What? They did that?
They did that. That's why on the school desks there were ink wells. Right? So
Pete's 120, you know that, Jeff.
No.
He's my aging mentor.
Jess, you're very cruel to me. So, look, Marcus, you've been a terrific guest, and we've covered a lot of grounds: crime, 100-year-old people, and fountain pens. Thank you so much, Marcus. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks for having me, Jess. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to hear more of our podcast, hit the follow button on Spotify, or the like button on SoundCloud, or the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts. Please also visit our Instagram page, LinkedIn, or website for behind-the-scenes footage of our podcasts and to get the latest on upcoming or recently released episodes. If you have any suggestions or feedback, please get in touch via our social media channels or by emailing planningxchange@gmail.com.